Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I'm Tyler Osby.
And today it's very exciting because we have our first ever recurring guest. I'm really excited to have her here. Author of the Bossfight Books on Mario 3 and Goldeneye 007, also has the Sweet Bitter podcast, and you can see their writing on AlyseKnorr.com. Please help us welcome Alyse Knorr.
Woo! Oh, I used to have a clapping button. Hold on.
Hold on. We got the button.
I can't find the claps. Air horns.
Oh, man.
Perfect.
That's even better. Wow.
Yeah, we have a really good soundboard. Thank you for being here. Also, thank you for embracing the intro theme song dance as hard as you did. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I love dancing, especially the chip tunes. It's
I know, right?
Great intro.
I'm never sure how that's gonna go when we have a guest on. Like, are they gonna dance? Are they gonna
bob their head back
They
and forth?
should dance. Honestly, it's like a red flag if they don't dance. I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but
No,
there are a lot of guests we've had on that we actually just didn't publish because they didn't dance.
Yeah. We've done so
really
many
good conversations, but they don't dance. Sorry.
Hundreds of unused episodes.
Hundreds at least.
They just didn't make the cut.
They didn't do it. They didn't make it. But we're
very
excited to have you,
which is why it's great that you're back for a second time.
Yeah, thank you so mumuch for having me back. I'm really excited to get to chat with you guys. I had so much fun the first time.
We had so much fun talking about Mario 3, and today we're going to discuss your other book, Goldeneye 007. Full name,
yes.
Goldeneye 007.
That's the full name, 64. Very important.
Very important. So we both read the book. Tyler and I are really excited to talk about it. And I think we should just kind of dive right in. Of course, if we go on tangents, we're going to go on tangents. That's just the way it is. And that's fine. But
to kind of for that too.
Yeah, start out. So Rare develops. That's also a really good button. So to start out, we were talking about so Rare created Goldeneye 007. But from what I understand, they weren't exactly on board and excited about it up top.
Yeah, they weren't. So at the point that Rare got offered the game, it was 1995, and Hiroshi Yamauchi, Nintendo's president at the time, one of its most legendary presidents, bought the licensing rights to adapt the next Bond movie, which was Goldeneye, into a video game. They didn't even know it was called Goldeneye at the time. It was just called Bond 17, the 17th Bond movie. And they offered it to Rare because at that time, Rare was Nintendo's first and only second-party developer. They were just kind of best friends with Nintendo. They had been developing awesome stuff for Nintendo, like Donkey Kong Country and its sequels. And they were using this cutting-edge graphics. And maybe because they're British, Nintendo was like, yeah, you're the right people to make this Bond game. And Tim and Chris Stamper, the head of Rare, they were like, no, thanks. We're not interested. And I think part of it was that they really were kind of wanting to move beyond film licensed and TV licensed games. And they were wanting to do more original things. They kind of felt like they'd made it with getting Nintendo's Donkey Kong character. And they were like, yeah, we're not going to go backwards to these film licensed games, which at the time were all flops. But this guy, Martin Hollis, this brand new hire, fresh out of college, he was their first computer science college graduate hire. And he had been a second programmer on the Killer Instinct arcade game. And he just kind of went to them and he was like, hey, I heard a rumor that there's a Bond game. Can we please do it? And can I please be in charge of it? And perhaps in a move to try to give Martin Hollis something to cut his teeth on, something to train him on in being a leader, a project lead, they said yes. And the rest is history.
I kind of love that. I love that they were just like, yeah, we'll give him a shot. Why not?
Yeah, to this day, Martin Hollis, when he talks about it, he's like, I do not know why they said yes to me. I was just some kid, and they said yes.
Wow. I wonder if it was just they just thought it was sort of low risk, right? Where it's we put out a licensed game. If it's garbage, then it's the same as everything else licensed at the time. If it's good, it's good.
True. Yeah, there was really nothing at stake. And they were just, they were really expanding at the time. At the beginning of the project in 1995, they had 40 staff. And at the end in 1997, they had doubled that and more. And so they were really just at that era for Rare. One of the developers told me it was like everything they touched turned to gold. So I think they felt like, okay, we can do this. And they staffed the entire project with almost all rookies who had never worked on a game in their life. One of the artists didn't even play video games. He was just like, oh yeah, I'm just going to fake it and get hired at Rare. And so, yeah, they were all rookies and they just kind of stumbled across a lot of gold.
That's so weird.
I wonder how many companies that happens where they give the rookies a game and then it doesn't go anywhere and it's just we just never hear about it.
I know it's a great question, and it's also, you know, at this era in the mid to late 90s, it was really the last time in Nintendo history or gaming history that you would have an 8-person, you know, 10-person team making a AAA title. That it could be such a small team that could work on that rather than these massive, you know, these super slick games now have like staffs of thousands of people working on them.
Wow. So I wanted to talk about this because when they started in the book, you mentioned how when they started development on GoldenEye, they were thinking Virtua Cop clone, kind of.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, yeah, that was the idea. I mean, we actually Martin Hollis, the director of the game, was generous enough to give me his game design document draft, and it's published in the deluxe version of the book. The very first sentence of it says, "The game will be similar to Virtua Cop in terms of gameplay." And so this was an arcade, Sega arcade on the rails shooter. So on the rails meaning you just kind of your character just was forced through a certain route through the level, and all you could aim was the gun. And so they really thought this game was going to be on the rails and that it would just sort of have more characters and more moves and better AI. It wasn't until very late in the development process that it switched to entirely 3D. Part of that was just that they had no access to an N64 for the majority of their development time. They didn't have specs. They didn't have a dev kit. They didn't even have a controller. So they truly did not know what the capabilities of the hardware they were working on were while they were working on it. And then when Super Mario 64 came out and they sort of played that completely three-dimensional world for the first time, they were like, oh, an on the rails arcade style game is going to be irrelevant. We have to take advantage of the full 3D. We have to take advantage of the analog stick. And that's what they did. They changed it really, really late into development.
that's amazing.
I wonder how
Yeah.
influenced they might have been by something like Quake too. Had probably just come out, or I guess in
Yeah.
'95
They
Quake wouldn't
played a
have been out yet.
lot of Doom. They played a lot of
Yeah.
Doom together on their networked PCs, and they loved that. But it was just like it's important to remember that at that time the first person shooter was just not even a thing on consoles, right? So they talk about kind of having this really discrete sense that like, okay, first person shooters that are 3D are for PCs, and you know, in terms of consoles or arcades, like this is what's possible. Then 64 just gave them the ability to like bring those two together for the first time.
Wow. Yeah,
That's really cool.
it is really cool. It's just weird to me that we could have had an on the rails GoldenEye game. It just sounds really.
It probably would have
No,
still been pretty
yeah.
fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it probably would have fun.
There's even some YouTube footage of that early model of it on the rails that they showed at like you know, trade shows and conferences just to show like for demos. So you can see it back when it was on the rails, and it was pretty boring. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, for sure.
Not great.
I mean, half the fun of the game for me, like now when I play it, is like walking around the map and looking at everything and like exploring. Like that's a big part of it too. So
Absolutely. Yeah. And even that was sort of accidental too. So because they were this team of rookies, they really didn't know what they could or couldn't do. They didn't know what cliches existed. They didn't know what they were like supposed to do. So they just went in with this totally open mind and totally open imagination. And they also had no sense of process. So they just went with this really iterative play-based process where they'd build something and play it and build something and play it. And because they got the N64 so late in development, they started by making the levels. They started by taking actual blueprints from the GoldenEye film set and pictures and photographs, and they designed all their models and all their textures. And so they had these levels built before they had objectives for what you'd be doing in those levels. And they talk about it now as being kind of backwards. Like it makes more sense to pick your objectives and then design the level around that. And a lot of first person shooters are sadly kind of feel like that. Even the open world ones feel like you're kind of on a path or on a shoot. I'm looking at you, Far Cry, right? Like it's like you literally can't deviate or you'll die. And so they went the opposite way, which means in a lot of levels like Bunker that are sort of anti-linear, they're just open spaces. There's rooms with no purpose. There's rooms that you just stumble into and you're like, oh, this is just here because I guess the bad guys needed this room in their base. It's the break room or it's the weapon storage room. And that sort of for the time lent a feeling of realism in that, you know, the level didn't exist for the purpose of the game. The level was just kind of there. It's where the bad guys hung out. And you really felt more like Bond, you know, infiltrating, sneaking around, trying to find things and make your way through.
Yeah, it's like Dungeons and Dragons when the party walks into a room and I like DM and they're like, "Oh, is there treasure in here?" I'm like, "This is where they sleep. There's
Oh,
nothing
I
in here.
love that. Yes, yes.
There's nothing in
Right,
here. This is just where
right.
they live." And that's what
Yes,
Goldeneye has.
totally. And I know you wanted to talk a little bit about the island and the dam level, and that's a
Yeah.
perfect example of like, okay, so gamers might remember that you could look off from the dam and out there in the middle of the water was this island, but you couldn't get to it. I mean, if you have like a Game Shark, you can kind of move your camera around and go look at it, but while you're playing the game, you cannot go to that island. And it really was just left over. They wanted to put, another objective in there where maybe Bond would have to sneak away on a boat and go and like disarm an alarm or something over there. There might be like a really cool gun over there you could go get, but they just didn't have time to finish it, and it was taking up too much processing speed. It was too clunky. It was too hard to finish it. So they left it in. To this day, Duncan Botwood, one of the designers who's responsible for the island, is kind of mortified by it and embarrassed by it. But it's another great example of like it just felt more like real to go through those levels because you were like, it's not for me. It's not just for me. It's just a space that exists, and I happen to be moving my way through it.
Yeah. I like
I
that a
like that.
lot. Yeah,
Yeah.
I also was wondering too, because if they're leaving these rooms in, right? Like they left these rooms in, that's taking up memory, which seems like a dicey proposition because
Oh yeah.
if I recall, they get the 64 and then they realize they're going to have an issue with space because it was too big at first, right?
It was like 3 times too large for what
Wow.
they had anticipated. So they were crunching textures. They were colors took up a lot more space, and so they were a lot more RAM. And so they, on a multiplayer level like complex, if you start looking at it, you notice that it's actually all black and white except a few little individual pixel splashes of red color here and there. That was just they were hand coloring individual pixels just to save room. And so yeah, what they ended up doing for those kinds of levels, so a huge level like Cradle, the very last level in the game, or a really detailed level like Jungle, they did put in a lot of fog, and so fog would allow the machine enough time to render, because it's only having to render what you're looking at. It's not rendering anything beyond that. They also used doors, so they added a lot of doors to levels because if this door opens only when the other door behind you has closed, you're allowing the machine to forget about that level behind the rest of the level behind you and only depict or present on screen render on screen what is ahead of you. So they kind of cheated and got their way around it using those kinds of little hacks.
Yeah. Have you? Okay, this is good. Tyler, hit the tangent button. We're going. Get ready. Thank you. So, have you played? There is essentially a fan made version of Goldfinger using the.
Yes.
Okay, have you played it?
I love it. Yes.
Okay,
It's the
because
most faithful true Goldeneye sequel that you'll ever find.
that's right.
Ooh,
And
I'm
so
gonna find this. I'm gonna play it today.
You
so
should.
I didn't play it on a computer emulator though. I bought a cart like on Etsy
Yeah.
that someone made and like flashed for you. I forgot how bad like that distance is because on the
Oh
first
yeah.
level it looks like you're in pitch black darkness until you walk into a wall because
Oh
of
yeah. Yeah.
how poorly, like, it's just too big of a space. The first level is like, I think
Yeah.
it's in Cuba and it's like a giant complex and there's these giant silos in the middle that you have to blow up
Totally.
and there's just it's just pitch black until you run into something.
Totally, and it's why, like, you have that nostalgic feeling when you're playing Goldfinger because they used all the same art assets and design
Yeah.
style and controls as Goldeneye. So you have that nostalgic feeling, but it also gives you that kind of horrible hangover feeling of like, ooh, maybe this game isn't as like amazing as I remembered it, right? So this is kind of a
Yeah.
big, just to take the tangent one step further, like the other game I wrote about, Super Mario Brothers 3, my question at the beginning of the project was like, is this a truly beautiful game or am I just feeling the nostalgia? I think with that game, I ended up coming to the conclusion that like, no, Super Mario Brothers 3 is a work of art. It holds up today just as well as it did back then. Goldeneye, I think the nostalgia is a much heavier factor, and part of that is looking at how the re-releases are going on Switch and Xbox, and people are like, the controls aren't very good, and
Yeah.
it was an amazing game. It still is, but I do think that nostalgia like is a bit more of a factor.
Yeah, I've heard this described. I have a friend who says this. I don't know if he got it from somewhere, but he'll say, "You know what? You don't miss playing GoldenEye. You miss being 12 and playing
Yeah.
GoldenEye."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so, and I I know that the developers kind of feel the same way, right? So like they made this game when they were all in their 20s, and so it was like a really nostalgic time for them too, as they were like growing up and goofing around and getting in their first serious relationships and lifelong friendships and being in their 20s. It was nostalgic for them too, and they today are kind of embarrassed about things like the frame rate or some of the goofs they did, but they also, I think, rightfully deserve credit for a lot of design decisions, and really innovative approaches to things like humor, that were not only ahead of their time, but I think do still stand the test of time for just being really, really incredible genius moves.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite parts about the book in general was how you kind of are watching these people grow up while they're making this
Yeah.
video game. I liked that a lot. And I thought you covered
Yeah.
that really well.
Yeah,
They're
and I
all
think
very sweet, and they're very touched by the role they've played in people's childhoods. Like they don't take that for granted. Not a single one of them. And I talked to all of them, and they just they feel really grateful that they could have played such a role in people's childhoods, and that people are still so excited about the game with this millennial nostalgia today. So
Yeah,
they're sweethearts. They really are.
nice. And they included paintball mode so I could play the game because I would turn that on so my mom wouldn't get mad at me.
There
Anybody
you go.
else? Yeah, there's
I
no
tried
blood
to
if it's
convince my
paintballs.
mom. Yeah, I tried to convince her to get that game for me. I was like, it has paintball mode, and she still wouldn't. She wouldn't do it.
Oh,
She wouldn't
bummer.
go for it. It's such
Yeah,
a
guns
bummer.
were a real no go in my house growing up. Which,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with as an adult. But
Yeah, I mean, it was a controversial part of the game too. I mean, one of the most famous stories from development is Shigeru Miyamoto, the legend, seeing the first demos of Goldeneye and being so offended by the level of violence that he almost canceled the project. He sent the team a fax, and he was just like, "We can't have this." Like, he actually suggested and was absolutely serious that at the very end of the game, during the credits, you would see that your character goes to the hospital and visits all of the people he's shot, and that they're okay, they're recovering, they're doing just fine, they're just nursing their wounds. That was the level of like squeamish that Nintendo was about the violence.
oh man, like a happier version of Metal Gear Solid 3's The Sorrow Fight.
Totally.
I think it would also be kind of like Mario 3, where it's like, what if they did it like it's all the movie? You're just in the movie, and at
Well,
the
in a way
end they all like
did.
take a bow.
Yeah, in
Yeah,
a way
Mario
they
was
did.
never in
So
any danger.
exactly. In a way they did. So at the very end of Goldeneye, this is hard to remember, but you can see it on YouTube, like there's like a credits, and it says like James Bond, and it shows him posing, and then it shows, Natalia, and then it shows her posing. So they kind of are doing a credits reel. That was sort of the, yeah, they didn't actually put in like you go shake your hand with the Russian guard and say, sorry about shooting you in the leg, but they did include the credits, which was meant to really play up that this is just a movie, this is campy, this is just Bond being Bond. We don't actually think it's okay to hurt people. And of course, none of the guys on the team had ever like fired a gun. They're just these British sweet nerds. They didn't know guns. They were literally looking at a picture book full of guns to draw these things and to decide how they would fire. They watched a bunch of Al Pacino gangster movies, and like it was just from the beginning meant only in terms of goofiness, and they really wanted to play that up.
I think they really came across with that though, especially with like DK mode and like the other like
Yeah.
big things they put in the game, like in the cheats and stuff too. Slappers only. Oh man,
Yeah,
slappers only is just a legend.
absolutely. Yeah, and they ended up toning down the level of gore. There was a version of it that was apparently like, one of them compared it to like that scene in The Shining when the elevator doors open and all the blood comes out. He was like, it was making us sick, like the amount of carnage in the game. So they really did tone it down. Things like the fact that the guards disappear after you shoot them. Their bodies don't just stay around, and that the blood is kind of a darker kind of grayish red, so things like that. They really did try to tone it down.
Wasn't the bodies disappearing? Wasn't that partially Miyamoto as well? Wasn't that like the way they kind of appeased it a little bit?
Yeah, and I think also it was a good move for their RAM too. So
Yeah,
speed up processing power.
It all comes back to memory.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Well, oh, go ahead, Tyler.
Well, I was going to say it's all memory, either nostalgic memories or technical video game console memory.
Well said. Well said.
That's right. So I have a thing in here. We're going to play a game called Mike Was on Vacation and doesn't remember exactly what this is. So I wrote David Doak and the pause menu. And I think that, because this is like kind of a big deal, was the pause menu at the time, correct? With like the dossier and like the things you'd click on. And
yeah, I think what was controversial about the pausing was that usually like you're in the middle of a firefight and you're getting ambushed, and your mom walks in and is like, you need to clean your room, and starts yelling at you, and you want to be able to pause it and have nothing bad happen to you. You need like a true pause so that then you won't be penalized. In Goldeneye, when you paused, your character sort of took their arm up and looked at their watch, and there were a few seconds where between when you hit pause and when the pause menu appeared, you could keep taking damage. And same thing when you unpaused. There were a few seconds where while your character went and put their arm down, so you're no longer looking at the watch, where you could take damage. And so pausing in Goldeneye is a very dangerous thing to do. You really can't pause unless you're in a safe place.
I remember
and that was on purpose, right? That was not like a bug or an accident.
It was on purpose. I mean, I think that they thought it was really funny. Honestly, a lot of the decisions they made were because they thought it was funny. And so Martin Hollis, his sort of guiding principles in designing the game were, is it fun? Is it funny? Does it make sense and stay logical within the world and rules of the game? And is it fair? And so he says that, that last one, is it fair? Some players might say it's not fair, but within the world of the game, you're supposed to be Bond. And if you are Bond in the world of the game, you don't get time to pause. You have to keep fighting, right? And if you get distracted by your watch, you might get shot. So Martin Hollis kind of asserted that it's funny and it's adds some intensity and urgency to the game. And once players learn the rule, it's kind of on them if they get hurt. And we know from game design in general that players want to feel like it's their fault if they get hurt. They don't like if it's like a bug in the game that's getting them hurt. So if it stays consistent, then players will usually accept it as fair.
Yeah.
Nice.
Also, that song in the pause menu,
Ooh.
it does not have any right to be as good as it is.
I think that's like the running TikTok joke is how good the Goldeneye music is, right?
Really good. It's just
so good.
really, really good. Yeah. Yeah. And the guys who made the music, they're just true musicians to their core. One of them, Grant Kirkhope, he grew up playing in all kinds of different bands. Like he played trumpet in the Royal Academy of Music, but also in funk bands. He played guitar in heavy metal bands. And then Graham Norgate, the other composer, he was a real like kind of goth music, electronica guy. And so between the two of them, they just divided the tracks in half, and they had all these different styles they could draw on. And they just tried to take the Goldeneye theme song, which they got the rights to, which was miraculous. They got the rights to use really any Bond music they wanted to. And so they just tried to do different spin-offs and different styles and versions. And they really took from what they had heard on the radio or what they'd heard in other Bond music and just had a lot of fun with it. And they really held nothing back.
Yeah, it's to the point with me where if I hear music from Goldeneye, I will think it's like from movie James Bond because it's like so ingrained in my head. I'm like, this is James Bond. It's just pure James Bond.
Yeah.
It's one of the few games that actually uses the actual James Bond theme too, right? I feel like there are other Bond games that don't have that.
Yeah, this game had absolutely outrageous licensing freedom. So it was the only Bond game, to my knowledge, that can use any music, including not just the Bond theme, but like the pop songs that were also included on it. So like Faith No More has a song on one of the Bond albums that inspired the Frigate song. So things like that, were hugely freeing, but also they could use any levels, any characters from any Bond movie ever. So that's how they could put stuff in there from Moonraker and from Goldfinger and from all these other Bond movies like the Baron Samedi or Jaws or the shuttle level and all those things, because they just had absolutely free licensing, like absolutely no restrictions to their licensing use.
There was something
you had mentioned that they did have some trouble with the different Bond likenesses, right?
Yes, that was the one thing they couldn't. So they wanted you to be able to play as 4 different Bonds: the Timothy Dalton Bond, the Sean Connery Bond, the Pierce Brosnan Bond, and the Roger Moore Bond. So they just thought that'd be really funny because everybody has their own favorite Bond depending on what generation you grew up in and which Bond you like best. Deep cut. And they thought it'd be really fun to be able to have those battle it out in multiplayer mode. But basically, the actors' agents were negotiating that it was going to cost millions of dollars just to get like Sean Connery's license or something like that. So they got shut down there. But they did have a very cute. They talk a lot about how they had like a send-off battle, and they did like first to 100 points between the 4 different Bonds, and Roger Moore won.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I remember, it's funny because you beat me to it, Tyler. I was just about to bring up the Bond thing because there's a James Bond game though that came out that was like kind of on the tail end of them doing James Bond games where you could play as all the different Bonds. I'm pretty sure.
Really?
I think
Oh,
007 Legends had a bunch of different ones in it.
That was
Okay.
Legends. Yeah,
that
that's
makes
the one.
sense.
Because I was like, how much did that cost then? If we know that they didn't work it with Goldeneye,
Yeah.
how much would it had to cost now? You know what I mean?
Oh, that makes sense. I mean, and then of course, because it's in the game's code, that's how you get the Goldfinger knockoff, spin-off game. Is that, well, the Sean Connery Bond was just sitting there. Why not use him?
Yeah.
So I would be remorseful if we didn't just bring this up because it is like Goldeneye, and you just mentioned the 4 Bonds fighting, but we have to talk about multiplayer because that's like the big part of the game. And how that almost didn't happen. It was kind of a rogue thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. The game was so far behind in production. They were so late. I mean, the Bond movie had been out for over a year. And so that's not good when your movie is out that long and your game adaptation has not come out. That at that point they started kind of floating around the idea of a multiplayer mode. They thought it would be really fun, and the higher ups at Rare, the Stamper brothers, were like, absolutely not. You may not do this. Under no circumstances are you allowed to do a multiplayer game. And they were very naughty. They were just very, they didn't like being told no, so they went for it. And they gave one of their newer coders, Steve Ellis, like 6 weeks or something insane like that to code the entire multiplayer mode, to create levels. And they basically did it in secret against the orders of their bosses. And then when they showed it to Ken Lobb, the Nintendo of America executive, who was kind of like their liaison between Nintendo and Rare, he was like, this is amazing. This is amazing. And he advocated to let Nintendo give them just a little bit more time to debug it. And yeah, I don't think the game would be as popular or as famous as it is without that multiplayer mode, which was the focal point of so many sleepovers and so many, drunken fun college nights. And so
I think you hit the nail on the head later on in the book when you talk about the how it sold more as time went on. Usually games have like a burst of sales when they first come out and then they sell more. Do you think multiplayer contributes to that, or what do you think happens there?
Absolutely. They were really worried at first because the sales were not super fast right away. They kind of trickled in really slowly, like you said. They looked disappointing at first, but a couple factors. I think that the multiplayer mode, certainly people played it at their friend's house and then everyone wanted it. Ken Lobb had also done this sort of risky rental marketing move where he basically told Blockbuster that like they could get their money back if they didn't want the game. So he kind of sent one to all the Blockbusters. No one asked for their money back, and they became the #1 rented game at Blockbuster for something like 3 years. So it was this slow burn, like word of mouth publicity. And it wasn't, the game came out in August 97. It wasn't until Christmas 97 that they had their first big spike. And then it took, a few more years to really reach that peak sales number. Where I think in the first few years after its release, they got to 8 million copies, which happens to be about double the amount that the film had grossed worldwide. So they got bigger than the movie they were based on, which is amazing.
Dang. Well, the movie itself is, it's as far as Bond movie goes, it's pretty mid.
Yeah. It was an important movie as far as relaunching Bond. It had been 6 years between the previous Bond film, License to Kill, with Timothy Dalton, and the new one. And so there was a real fear that Bond was dead, that this was a fad that was over, people weren't going to like Bond anymore, and that he wasn't really, he wouldn't work in the 90s because, the USSR was no more. That was his primary, Soviet enemy. And the 90s was a time of a lot of hyper consciousness about PC, and it was like, well, Bond is kind of a misogynist. Is this still something people want to watch? And so, as mid as the movie was, it did revive Bond enough to keep him relevant. Why I think the studio stayed afloat, and we still have the Bond franchise today. It's the longest running franchise in any cinema.
Wow.
Yeah.
And it has a lot of movies in it too.
Yeah. When you were writing the book, like how much did you consider like having to cover the movie versus the game? Like, because you feel like you have to mention it, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting question because I'm one of those people who played the game long before I saw the movie. And I didn't remember anything about the movie. I had to rewatch it for the purpose of writing the book. And I was really struck by how, actually, because I knew the movie Austin Powers so much more than this movie. That's what I was watching at the time when I was 10. And I was struck by how much of how much of Austin Powers is based on Goldeneye. But yeah, I talk about it enough to talk about like why the game was so important, because the game kind of brought a bunch of people back to the franchise, or introduced the franchise to people like me who just kind of didn't care before they played the game. So in the like I do make the claim that the game Goldeneye not only saved the N64 and possibly Nintendo, but it also saved the Bond franchise in general.
Was the N64 considered to be kind of flopping before Goldeneye?
Oh, absolutely. The N64 was in trouble. When the N64 came out, I want to get you the exact numbers on this. It was ridiculously late. It was like years late from when they were saying it was going to come out. And when it came out, it was quite hard to code for. So the PlayStation had gone out of their way to be really easy to code for. And because of that, they had a huge library of games. Whereas the N64, Nintendo sort of didn't make it easy for developers. They were wanting to keep really tight control over their patent and things like that. So no one was making games for the N64. They were tired of Nintendo's licensing rules, their royalty policies. And so everyone kind of flocked to Sony. And what kept the N64 aloft really was Rare. So games like Banjo-Kazooie, Goldeneye, Conker's Quest, all of those games really kept Nintendo afloat, to the point that, I speculate that because 1 in 4 Nintendo 64 owners owned Goldeneye, it's not possible to know how many bought a Nintendo 64 just for Goldeneye, but it really was the killer app for that platform. And most N64s were sold with Super Mario 64. So when we compare sales numbers, I do think Goldeneye was driving sales for that console. And kind of saved Nintendo from their own hubris, in a sense of like waiting so long to release the N64 and doing such a sloppy job of it.
Yeah. And Goldeneye came out relatively later too than the release of 64. It
came out later, yeah. It gave people in a landscape where people didn't have a lot of games to play for the N64, and also Nintendo had already suffered during the console wars from this reputation of being this like kids console only with cartoony games. And so Goldeneye kind of proved that the N64 was for grown-ups too, or for older kids or adolescents, right? And so it gave them, it tapped into a new genre, right? Of course, since then, Nintendo has kind of given up on that market entirely and leaned into their family-friendly ethos with things like Zelda and things like that. But at the time, the N64 really needed Goldeneye to tap into that market and prove that this was a console that had more than just Mario and Mario Kart to play.
I needed it too. As someone who didn't have a PlayStation, I needed to feel cool. So I'm glad.
Yeah,
that for
absolutely.
Me.
It also had the advantage of being 4 players too, because the PlayStation only had 2 controllers. Like there are things for that, but like the N64 had like the full multiplayer experience built right in with no extras.
Absolutely. And that's what's so interesting about the N64, right? Is that in terms of its sales, it really was not a hit. I mean, Sony sold 3 times as many PlayStations as N64, right? As Nintendo sold N64s. And it was the GameCube that followed the N64 was like Nintendo's absolute biggest slump in home console sales until the Wii in 2012. So it was a dicey time for Nintendo. They were not dominating the market the way they always had been with the NES and the Super NES. So what's interesting is that while the sales are not impressive, there's these really like just incredibly legendary games for the N64, like Mario Kart, like Goldeneye, like Super Mario 64, that were truly like genre-defining games that like played to the N64's strengths and that sort of revolutionized how platformers and shooters could work in 3D. So in terms of influence, I think the N64 really came out on top. But in terms of sales, it was not that. It was barely hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, as someone who it's their favorite console, I'm fully recognizing that I have a soft spot for it, and it is not the best console in any way, shape, or form.
It's a weird one, right? Because it's actually so powerful, right? It did things that it's graphical processing power, it's true 3D gameplay, it's analog stick, which beat the PlayStation. It really was ahead of its time, but I think a lot of people just didn't know what to do with it. And a big part of it was just how long it took to release it. I include some ads in my photo edition of the book, but they literally were publishing ads in like computer electronics magazines that said, "You can't buy this yet. Wait for it. Don't because the new generation had come out, right?" And they were like begging people, like, "Don't wait for us to finish this before you buy a PlayStation." But it just came so late that a lot of people the moment had already passed by.
Yeah. What do you think is the lasting legacy of something like GoldenEye? Because you're just saying that the N64 didn't have a ton of games, but it had a lot of like important games. Where do you think GoldenEye fits into like the importance in the grand scheme of games?
Yeah, I mean, I really think you don't have home console first-person shooters without GoldenEye, right? So if a game like Wolfenstein and Doom and all those id Software games for the PCs were like the grandfather of the modern first-person shooter, then I think GoldenEye was the father. Like that was like a key part in that family tree, because at the time that it came out, first-person shooters were really only for PC gamers, and console gamers and PC gamers were quite separate. And so GoldenEye was like this Trojan horse that brought first person shooting into the home console market, got people excited about it. Even the term first person shooter was not used until GoldenEye came out. And then when you look at the Usenet data for that term online, it spikes. So I argue that it played a really, really influential role in first person shooter mechanics with things like the heads up display. It was one of the first games to do that. The first games to really think about what the process of like reload and ammo looks like. One of the first games to kind of structure mission objectives, right? Because in Doom, you're just kind of running around looking for keys. In GoldenEye, there's all kinds of different mission objectives. Oftentimes it is some version of look for a key, even though that key might be David Doak, the secret agent, the double agent, or the database you need to hack into or whatever. But it did introduce objectives, and it introduced multiplayer console, like couch-based co-op multiplayer gaming, and popularized it in a really big way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I wanted to ask about this because we just talked about controllers.
Yeah.
There is a couple different things I want to talk about. First, there was a Rumble Pack reload system.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain this? Because this is something that I read in the book and I was like, I'd never heard of this before.
So as they're developing the game, they have no access to the N64 controller. They were using a, in their words, butchered Sega Saturn controller to play test with. Once they got the N64 controller, they were sort of thinking about all the things it might do. And they were thinking about all its bells and whistles. And one of those things was the Rumble Pack. And so at some point, someone floated the idea that maybe to reload in the game, you would have to take your Rumble Pack out and then slam it back in again. And that idea did not last long. I don't think it ever even made it to the testing stages. It led to a really interesting conversation I had with Martin Hollis and also with some gaming scholars about realism in games, right? So like, yeah, in some ways it would be more quote unquote realistic to physically have to reload the controller like you would reload a gun. But in terms of what kinds of realism we expect in games, we actually don't want that kind of realism. We want it to feel realistic in terms of how responsive the controls are. We want the environments to look immersive and cool, which adds to that feeling of like, oh, I'm really here. I'm really a spy. But we're totally fine. We don't want to see our characters stoop over and pick up ammo and look at it and load it. That's boring, right? What we want is not necessarily realism, but immersion. And the GoldenEye guys knew that really, really well. So they knew that, when you shoot at a chair, it shouldn't blow up in the real world, realistically. But they knew that in the world of Bond, where everything blows up and it's very cinematic and it's very campy and hilarious, in that world, to immerse us in that world, chairs should blow up when you shoot them. So they made a lot of anti-realistic, unrealistic choices that do serve to immerse you further in the world of the game.
And that's kind of like goes along with like the humor in it too, right? Because it is
Exactly.
like, it's kind of just, it's really campy when you think about it a little bit.
It is. And I would argue that's another one of its lasting legacies now, right? So like, yeah, I guess there's certain campiness to Doom, but also like, it's kind of a grim, I don't know. It's sort of like, it's only campy if you're wanting to be campy. Otherwise, it's just really grim and dark and oppressive. And certainly, there's lots of ways to read that. But I think GoldenEye was just really overt about its humor, about its silliness, and about, I think that made first-person shooters a lot less threatening. Like y'all mentioned the paintball mode, but also if a mom walks by and sees all her kids like, kind of slapping each other on screen and just goofing around, like it seems non-threatening. And so it allowed a lot of younger gamers to enter this world, for better and for worse, through that humor. And you also see games today like Fortnite and, of course, all the Free Radical games that followed GoldenEye with those developers who formed their own Free Radical company, the Time Splitter series. All of those had a lot of that humor and still do.
Nice. Okay, now that we talked about the Rumble Pack thing, I want to get to the other controller part of it, and that is the famous 2-controller setup. Because
Yeah.
I've never tried this. I could. I realize now. I'm like, I have Goldeneye and I have 2 controllers. I should give this a go. Have you
Yeah.
tried it? What are your thoughts?
I've tried it. It's tough for me just because yeah, you're talking about the fact that they had the genius move to introduce 8 different control styles into the game, for half of which let you play holding one N64 controller in one hand and one N64 controller in the other hand, which means that they de facto invented the dual analog control scheme that we still use with any first person shooter that comes out today. One stick for aim, one stick for movement. So they're very proud of that. And I find it very clunky just because the N64 controller in general is pretty clunky. And I was so raised on GoldenEye where your left index finger is your trigger and your right index finger is your aim, and you have just the one stick. So it's just not what I'm, as fluent with. But it's a trip, and I can't play on the Switch or the Xbox with the 2 controls. Like I've set it up to try to play it like a modern shooter, and I just can't get used to it. It's like trying to learn to write with your non-dominant hand or walk on your hands or something.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna try it for science one of these days,
Yeah,
but
you should.
I don't know if I'll really enjoy it. Have you done it, Tyler?
Probably. I think I've done it in Perfect Dark. It's not
not
good, but it is cool.
Yeah,
You feel cool holding 2 controllers.
It's like when you go to the
It's a good
arcade and
party
you grab
trick.
both guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it
a
also
party
limits
trick.
you when you're playing multiplayer because if everybody's using 2 controllers, you can only have 2 people.
That's right.
So
Yeah, and
you're limited.
the controls aren't exactly hyper responsive to begin with, so I think it makes a hard thing even harder in some ways.
Yeah. The Rumble Pack thing just made me think about when you go to an arcade now, like a Dave and Buster's, and they
Yeah.
have the gun games and they have the little button on the gun for like, you don't shoot off screen anymore. Like I was always used to as a kid, you actually push the button and you're like, that's really cool. And then like the 3rd or 4th time you do it, you're like, okay, this is getting annoying. Like having to
Yeah, and I
push that every
always
time.
thought that like shooting off screen was kind of cool,
Me
like I
too.
don't know, it's very performative, like everybody sees you
Mhm.
doing it. Yeah.
Like, boom, 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 yeah, it feels really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, man. Well, okay. I have so much more on here, but I want to talk about one thing that is it was a big thing when this game came out, and they use the term AI, which is wrong. It's not AI, but we're going
Right.
to use it for the general video game term about how it appears that the enemy NPCs are thinking and responding to your
Yeah.
reactions, but in reality, they are not, correct?
Yeah, so they, they're very limited by what their computing power and processing power could do at the time. So what they did instead to make the AI appear to be thinking was a lot around things like their motion capture acting, right? Which one of the developers, one of the artists on staff actually had to do all the motion capture acting. Duncan bought what the poor guy got like beat up for the making of the game because he had to film every single like getting shot effect. But it was one of the first games, if not, I think it's the first game that when you shot someone in the arm, they would wince and grab that arm. And if you shot them in the crotch, they'd cup their, crotch in their hands and fall over. If you shot them in the head, they'd immediately drop down. So it was location based reactions and animations made it look more realistic. They also did things like they had the guards, while the guards are kind of standing, not noticing you, they'll be buzzing at flies, or they'll be kind of combing their hair back with their hand, or picking their nose or biting their nails. And so those things made it look like these were kind of like more realistic AI. They have patrol routes. They would kind of get antsy and stand on one foot like they had to pee or something. So all of those things just led to the effect that these were more intelligent guards. Also, the fact that they would alert. So in certain levels, in certain spots, if you're too loud, the guards will hear you and come for you. And that was a pretty simple hack that they did actually in their coding to figure out how to make the AI perform that. But it had huge dividends in terms of making people think like, oh wow, the guards can hear me. I need to be more spy-like. I need to be more careful.
Wow.
It encouraged people to be stealthy at times, which is a little bit different
Yes.
for this genre too, right?
Yeah, there are levels that are very, very hard to beat if you're trying to do run and gun, which I think is cool because they really want to emphasize that Bond is a spy. He's supposed to be sneaky. He's supposed to be creative. So there's one of my favorite levels, Bunker. You really have to beat it with karate chops and throwing knives and things like that, or single shots. Otherwise, you're going to get creamed by the AI that spawns forever without ever stopping.
Dang, they'd done infinite respawning enemies before Call of Duty was even a
They
a
sure
dream.
did. They sure did. Yeah, the enemy just like literally copies itself and comes in, and so This is also true at the start of the archives level. So at the start of the archives level, you're being interrogated and you don't have a gun. You've been disarmed, and you're standing there. And you really have to use your karate chop or like one single shot, or you will get trapped in that room, and you'll never get out.
Yeah, you just mentioned guns, so this leads right into the next thing I have here.
Yeah.
I wrote down like guns as characters because
Yeah.
you talk about this in the book, and I mean, we all are thinking about the club. Okay, everyone loves
Yes.
to talk about the club.
Yes.
So if we can go into that and how it was named and like that kind of thing, I think that'd be really great.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they really wanted all their guns to feel really different, and they were inspired in some ways by Doom. And then they were inspired a lot, like I mentioned, by like the movie Heat and other different like mobster movies and action movies they had seen. John Woo, they loved John Woo action movies. So they wanted every gun to really feel different in terms of its sound effects, its look, its feel, its rate of fire, accuracy, right? And so they really wanted every gun to kind of have its own unique personality. And of course, the gun with the most personality. They were one of the very first games to ever have a sniper rifle. By the way, that's another huge contribution to first-person shooters in general. But the game with the gun with the most personality in the game is definitely the Quab. It's just this legendarily awful machine pistol. This Czech-made. You know, it's very kind of chattery. It's loud. It's conspicuous, and it's just wildly inaccurate. And they really did design it that way. They said there was actually a version of it that was even worse. It could hit nothing at all when you fired it, and they just thought it was hilarious, but not fair. So they modeled the Quab after this Czech machine pistol called the Scorpion, but then they had to change all their gun names to made up names because Nintendo's lawyers were like, well, gun manufacturers might sue us if we use any actual weapon names. What's ironic is that, of course, today gun manufacturers pay a lot of money for product placement in video games. But at that time, no one knew what was going on. So they renamed the Scorpion the Spider. Well, after they had printed out 800,000 instruction manuals with the name Spider, Nintendo's legal department was like, wait, Spider is already the name of a paintball gun, so we can't use that either. So they went back and they were like, we need something fast. We need something that's definitely not the name of a gun. And so they named the Quab after Ken Lobb, K-Lob Quab, that Nintendo of America employee who had really championed their work for the last 9 months of development and helped them get their multiplayer mode and all of that. And they to this day kind of say like they feel really bad naming such a gun after this wonderful person. But Ken Lobb loves it. He loves it. He's like, he always says, you know, if you're playing one-hit kills, it's the best gun in the game because it has such a big spread.
Oh, yeah.
So actually, in one-hit kills, the Quab dominates. You should always pick that gun up.
That's where it shines. Right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Totally.
Goldeneye strategies right here, exclusive on Codex.
Yeah, you're welcome.
That's Odd Job, right? That's the one that everyone...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you want to be a douche.
That's true. Everybody knows that only cheaters pick Odd Job.
Yes, that is 100% true.
So I wanted to talk also about the way they did the character models because they used reference like real people's photos, right?
They did, yeah. So they got permission to use like Pierce Brosnan's likeness and the likeness of all the other major actors, and so they had these poor actors go in and like take front shots, back shots, and like side shots of their heads so that Brett Jones, the character designer, could map those textures onto the models. But then for like the guards and the scientists and the civilians and all of that, they needed more faces. And so Brett Jones, the character designer, just kind of like marched around the Rare campus with his big digital camera and took pictures of everybody around. He took pictures of all the GoldenEye development team. He took pictures of like the cafeteria lady at Rare. He took pictures of the Stamper Brothers children. Those did not make it in because that would be creepy to shoot your boss's children. But they're in the game's code. Like you can still see them in the game's code. They're just not in play. And a few of the faces he sort of modified, like he'd add an ugly scar or he'd add like really bad teeth or something. But basically the guards and the other extraneous characters in the game are all real people. They're all, and including the entire GoldenEye staff. Even the composers are in there. And so sometimes now when I'm playing the game, I'm like shooting at someone. I'm like, you know, screw you, Grant Kirkhope. Like, you know, take that, Graham Norgate.
I love it.
It's a lot of fun.
So there was one other thing, but this was mentioned in Mario 3, and I can't remember if it was on air or off air. how we talked about how we wanted to have you back on for Goldeneye. And then you mentioned to us that there's a speedrunning community for Goldeneye that's pretty
Yes.
intense. So I kind of wanted to
Yeah,
talk about that today too. Before we
there's
end.
an incredible group of speedrunners keeping Goldeneye alive today, in terms of like esports. And they are fighting all the time for like seconds, for fractions of seconds. And they have these boards you can read online who the current record holders are and things like that. But they are amazing to watch, and they create all these different challenges for themselves. Of course, it could be like, how fast can you run through an individual level? How fast can you run through the whole game? At Agent 00, or 007, or Secret Agent 007, 00 agent level. But they also have different techniques they use. So like they figured out that if you just stare at the sky, or if you just stare at the ground, the game runs faster because the game doesn't have to render as much. So they can basically speed run with their eyes closed, is essentially what they're doing, because their character is not looking at anything, they're just looking up. So they've come up with these incredible different hacks and incredible different techniques. And they really have been active since 1998, when right after the game came out. They used to have message board moderators, and you'd have to mail in like a VHS tape of your speed running. This is true of all speed running, but GoldenEye just in particular has had all these innovations, like speed strafing and all these little hacks and things that they do. One of my favorite stories from the speedrunning community is that there was at some point this guy who held all the records, and then this new player came on the scene, and he was posting incredible times, and no one knew like who this guy was or how he was doing it. It seemed impossible, the kinds of times he was posting, and so everyone was like, okay, we have to find this guy, we have to see what he's doing. Turns out he was like a 10-year-old boy in Pakistan, and his brother recorded him doing a speed run, and it was like, yeah, this is a real guy. He's just this child named Ryan Isran, and he's still a record holding champion who comes out of retirement every now and then and just blows away everyone's records. He's just like a prodigy at this. And he was actually setting these records on like the European version of the N64, which is known to run slower than the American version. So all the speedrunning guys were like, mail the kid an American N64 so he can get even better times. And they did this, and yeah, it was just incredible. I think you can see the YouTube video online of this guy. His username is Perfect Ace, and his brother just filming him, this little boy, and just hyping him up, and he's dominating.
I love that.
Yeah,
wow.
so
The
cool.
child prodigy at GoldenEye speedrunning.
Yeah. They have a lot of folklore, this community, a lot of stories, a lot of oral history, and so you can watch it on YouTube, and they'll do Twitch streams and things like that. But they're quite tight knit, and they're really sweet guys, and I really enjoyed talking to Logan West, one of the speedrunners who's really active in the community.
Nice, that's awesome. Well, I think we have to like tie it up soon here, and we got to talk about like the legacy of GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And so I have a question that's kind of I mean, it's a hard question, I think, but like it's about recapturing like the lightning in the bottle they caught with Goldeneye. Like, why do you think the sequels and remakes and the things we've seen now haven't done as well? Do you think it was just that time and it was the perfect moment for this game?
Yeah, it was a real combination of things, right? So it was a moment in gaming history when we were still playing multiplayer together on our couches, locally, right before, online gaming kind of took over. So I think like the game has such a heavy feeling of nostalgia around it because of just what you said at the top of the episode, which is that this was people's childhoods. This is when they were bonding with their best friends and their neighbors and their siblings. And it was more about that. That's what we happened to be playing. But it could just as well be Mario Kart or Super Smash Brothers or something like that. So there's that element, and then there's just like what those guys made, the way that it balanced humor and challenge, the way that it was for a lot of us the very first time we played a first person shooter, and that it offered us something really goofy and exciting and new. Whether it was in terms of silly types of guns or really interesting settings for levels, or forcing us to do that stealth play. It just was I think it achieved that perfect combination of what Martin Hollis was going for, of being fun and of being funny and of feeling like the world of Bond. And so it really, it's just one of those games that really did kind of happen to do everything right at once, at just the right time, for us as a generation and for within gaming history. And I think a lot of it is that the guys who made that game loved each other, and they love each other still. They're friends. They enjoyed each other. They had fun while they made it. They play tested it while they made it, and they were such a small team that they could iterate and talk to each other and work really closely and intimately. That's just so hard to do now. With you see it in lots of indie games or tour games, but with big first-person shooters, like big studio games, which is what GoldenEye was. It had all the best graphics for its time. It had all the resources of a top-line AAA publisher for its time. But today, you're not going to get a feeling of auteurness. You're not going to get a feeling of like, I mean, these guys literally spray painted their initials in certain levels on the wall. Their hand is in it. And so some of the messiness, floppiness, goofiness, you just feel like you're playing a game that was made by people.
That's great. Yeah, that's such a nice, heartfelt message. But before we end, I have to ask, because it's one of my favorite games. What are your thoughts on Perfect Dark? Do you love Perfect Dark? Because
I really enjoy Perfect Dark. I just always struggled with the frame rate. So like I was used to GoldenEye, which already had a bad frame rate, and I just, because GoldenEye had played it so much, I really loved the sci-fi elements of Perfect Dark and all of that. But even at the time, I remember just feeling so frustrated by the lag. And I think that's where I came down on it. But it is a beautiful game. I mean, it is, and it's cool to see those guys get to do their own original ideas, because they were very bored of James Bond by the end of GoldenEye. They wanted to do. Also, what's touching about Perfect Dark is it was very important to them to have a female protagonist, which I really, really love and appreciate.
Oh man, Joanna Dark. That storyline. Like, I loved that story as a kid.
It was a good story.
Like Elvis, the alien, everything about it was just hitting all the fun things for like me at the time. I really dug it. I think I am also burying the frame rate in my nostalgia with those issues, because Tyler and I have gotten into it.
I can't abide the frame rate anymore. I played it back in the day, but I don't have the same level of nostalgia a lot of people did. Like I said, my mom wouldn't let me play it. When I go back and play it, I'm just like, man, 10 frames a second is rough.
It is. I mean, I'm so struck by this. Like, here's these guys that built their career on GoldenEye, and were offered the chance to do a sequel and make, because they were paid on a commission, right? So they were making buckets of money. They bought houses. They started their lives and their journeys with this. But when given the chance to make another Bond game, there were many factors, but one of them was we want a woman to be the hero. Like, that's incredible. Like, I would love to see more of that today. Like, I just think that's a really, really cool thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I would also argue that the Bond part of GoldenEye is not really why it was successful. It was maybe a foot in the door. Maybe some people picked it up off the shelf because of that, but like that's not why. That's why all these other James Bond games, they're not as good, because they're just not good games.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that a lot of the other Bond games, like they lean into the violence of Bond, and they lean into the sort of macho, like, shoot 'em up of Bond. But GoldenEye had the stealth, and it had the campiness. Like, people forget that Bond movies are supposed to be funny. They are over the top, hilarious a lot of times, whether intentional or not. And so I think that the amount of humor really can't be, like, the importance of humor in GoldenEye can't be overstated.
You can't tell me the people who made Moonraker were not making
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah, it's outrageous.
Yeah, this is oh man, yeah, I love it. Well, it was really great having you on to talk about GoldenEye. I'm so excited to have you back, and just in general, like, we'll find something else. We'll have you back on.
Oh yeah,
I love it.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be so
I do have
fun.
one more question
Thank
for you.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite James Bond movie?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I think I'm partial to GoldenEye just because I'm kind of ambivalent about the Bond franchise personally, and so GoldenEye, because I'm so passionate about the game. When I watched it, it's funny because I think what they intended was that you'd play the game and you'd be like, wow, I'm playing the movie. But instead, when I watch the movie, I'm like, oh, they made a movie out of one of my favorite games. And so I like to watch it and be like, oh yeah, I love this level. And it's a scene, but yeah, so I think I do have a soft spot for it. And it's a funny movie, like they had these things going on, like Famke Janssen, who plays Xenia, like literally hurt a man in the scene where she's like, she like kills a man with her thighs.
Oh yeah,
Xenia on a top, and like she really hurt a stunt guy on set by doing her thing. And so I don't know, I just think it's a cool movie to look at. Judi Dench coming in, and the gender politics of Goldeneye are super interesting, and also the way that they're trying to make a Bond for the 90s and this kind of like a world of more cyber threats than like nuclear threats. I just think it's a really interesting moment in history, and it was a moment in history that I was, growing up during. And so looking back, it feels like just a kind of cool historical artifact, and it's a like pretty good movie. Like it's Pierce Brosnan is my Bond because that's my generation, but I think he makes a really great Bond. He's really debonair. He's always unflappable under pressure. He's he's very handsome. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a
Agreed
soft
on all
spot for
points.
Goldeneye too. Yeah, I like
Yeah.
it. It took me so long to realize that it was the same actor that was playing Jean Grey as it was playing Zenyatta Top, like an embarrassingly long time.
I know, right?
It was like
She's
15
so-
years before I realized it, and I was like, "Oh my god."
She is one of the best Bond villains. I mean, you
Oh,
can't
yeah.
in a world of incredible Bond villains, she's just so iconic, like
That alone too, like you can't take Bond seriously when you got guys like Jaws. Like he's just a big guy with metal teeth. Like you can't.
totally. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's outrageous, and I think like I think the game really leans into that, and it's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna go into the jungle and try to blow up this lady who like strangles men during sex with her thighs. I mean, it's very funny, right? Like,
yeah. No, I also love too. And we like I swear we'll end at some point. But when you have the levels in the multiplayer that have like the other movies, like the
Yeah.
multiplayer levels, like
yeah.
the temple one.
Yeah.
Like that's just such a good detail, like, and that shows they've actually like
Totally.
tried and cared to make
Totally.
it
They really did. I mean, I'm also cracking up talking about the role of women in Goldeneye, just thinking about how horrible Natalia is in some levels when she's like, she's like this damsel in distress, but she's like yelling at you, like you're trying to prevent her from getting killed while she walks into bullets on purpose. She's like the worst escort mission you could have, right? And then she's yelling at you, like she'll be like, Bond, keep it down. I'm trying to think over here. So it's this really interesting thing because in the 90s, like computer science was new. People were going like as far as like degrees and people studying that, and it was an extremely male dominated field. And so they were trying to be like super feminist and like avant-garde and like cutting edge, having this like woman computer programmer in your movie, which is really cool and in your game. But then she's so annoying. Sometimes I'm like, you kind of just like shoot her yourself because you're like, I can't handle this anymore. Like you are so annoying.
Yeah. I also love the trope in movies, like at the time where if it's sci-fi, if it's not sci-fi, if it's techie, if it's like science-y, we're gonna have all the monitors, just every monitor all over the walls. That's what makes it computery.
Yeah. Like what a great like the plot of Goldeneye, the movie and game, like the looming threat is it's not even a satellite that's going to blow up the world. It's a satellite that's going to like take everyone's bank account information and cause like chaos in the global markets. Like it's such a 90s movie. Like the anxiety is around financial markets. That's how little we had to fear. This was right before 9/11, right? Like this was right before global terrorism and all these things. And so there's something so quaint about it where you're walking around Goldeneye and literally no one knew how computers worked. We were all afraid of Y2K. No one knew how it worked. And so a lot of times the mission objective is go and shoot the computer screen. Like, because that'll eliminate the problem. Like just go shoot the screen and it's good. It's just very funny. It's like so of its time in a way that's really cool to look back on.
Yeah, we have to stop the financial crisis and save capitalism. That's the entire plot.
Yeah. Because the 90s famously were a great bull market for stocks, I think.
Right.
So like at the time it was like everything's great. What could go wrong? The computers could go wrong.
The computers are going to go wrong, and they're watching us. Like there's a lot in there about surveillance and like shooting the cameras while they watch you, which is interesting today to play, right? Where it's like people are being spied on all the time by their devices, but we don't care, right? Like we don't like I know that my phone right now is spying on the entire conversation we're having. It's going to give me so many ads for things after this, but
right. It makes me think though that because it's a save capitalism, we can say without a doubt that Helldivers 2 completely inspired by Goldeneye. I think we can say that on a podcast.
Love it.
Right?
I
think so.
Yes.
Well, with that though, thank you for being on. We really appreciate it. It's so fun having you here. And we have a segment where we talk about what video games you've been playing. And I'm going to ask Tyler first because I completely forgot to tell you. And so I'm surprising you. So Tyler, what you been playing?
Oh, I'm all about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth right now. It's just, it's my whole life, except for the couple of Helldivers 2 games I've played with you, Mike.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's all Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I love it. I love those characters. I love the world.
Nice.
I'm trying to 100% it, except for there's some stuff that's not going to be fun, like playing the Fort Condor mini game on hard mode. Not going to be fun. Probably not going to do it. But that's what I've been playing. That's it.
Cool.
That's all you've been playing? Well, Alyse,
Yeah.
what have you been playing?
I'm still having a lot of fun with Starfield. I'm not going to lie.
Ooh.
I've been doing this social experiment where, of course, one of the first things I did in the game was get married. I love, romancing options. I think that's so fun. And so what I'll do is you can like flirt with your wife at any point in the game. There's a flirt dialogue option. And I'm doing an experiment. Don't tell my real wife I'm doing this, but I will flirt with my video game wife, Sarah, and I'll kind of note what I said to her and what she said back to me. And then I'll use that same line on my real life wife and try to see what she says back to me and compare my wives. And it's been hilarious. It's been very funny.
Has it ever eerily matched or no?
No, it never will match because my wife is like a real person and Sarah,
Fair enough.
I guess that's fair. I guess it's fair. She's not an NPC. So
so it's so like the dialogue is so corny, right? So in the game you'll be like, I just have 3 little words for you. I love you. And then your video game wife will be like, you have no idea how good it makes me feel when you say things like that. And then I'll say the same, like really corny line to my real wife. And she gets like suspicious. She's like, what did you do?
That's very
Or
funny.
she'll be like, why are you being weird? Why are you saying weird things like that?
Stop being weird. That's fantastic. What a fun thing to do. I might do that myself, next
Try
time.
it.
Yeah, I'll do it with Baldur's Gate 3 though. So it's going to be clearly out of place.
Perfect. What are you playing, Mike?
Well, I've been playing Helldivers 2 quite a bit. I beat Hollow Knight recently, which was fun. But I only did the first ending. I think I mentioned that last week. Maybe I'm repeating myself. I started playing a game. It's called Warhammer 40K Bolt Gun. It's like a Doom style clone. Like it was made last year. It came out last year, but it's in the style of a boomer shooter Doom game, but with and it's really fun. It's just like nonstop action. You're a space marine. It's ridiculous. You can actually, there's a taunt button when you press Y. He's like, for the Emperor. And he's like, purge the heretics. It's very silly. Very fun. Up my alley. And then, but last night though, I was playing Helldivers and my wife next to me played the game A Short Hike. Have you heard of this game, Tyler or Alyse?
No.
It sounds familiar, but that's all I know.
It's a short hike. You play a little bird on an island and it's like a national park. And you're just exploring and you're just like getting golden feathers. And when you get the golden feathers, you can do more things like climb, like rock climb or fishing.
Oh, that's really cool.
And you beat it in like 3 hours. It's a very short game. It is a short hike, but it's very cute and a really cool, cozy game. And it's on Game Pass. Or like Switch. I think it's like $8 on Switch. So I don't work for them, but it was very cute and it's very short. So if anyone is listening and likes this kind of games, you should try it out. So
I love it.
Yeah, awesome. Very fun. Well, with that, do you want to plug anything? Do you want to like mention your website, your podcast, all that stuff on here?
Yeah, I mean, all my my books are available on AlyseKnorr.com. And my podcast is Sweet Bitter. We cover queer and women's histories, different untold stories from queer and women's history past. So yeah, check it out. It's Women's History Month.
Awesome. Yeah, and also you have a TikTok. It's really good. I love your TikTok.
I have a TikTok. Yeah, if you have any questions at all about Goldeneye or Mario, you can ask me on TikTok and I will answer. A lot of material that I did in my research for both these projects just couldn't make it into the books because there's so much. So yeah, ask away, and I'd love to investigate.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have
so
any
much
other
for
books?
being
Are you working on any other books? You probably can't tell us if you are.
Well, I'm working on my first novel actually right now. I'm writing a post-apocalyptic novel, and I have a couple books of poems coming out. I have one come out in September, and when I'm not doing video game history, I write poetry and fiction. So yeah, my book Ardor is a collection of love poems about what it's like to build a family during climate change and COVID and things like that. And my next book coming out is about a pack of sentient wolves that run an ecotourism company in Southwest Colorado.
Okay.
I love this. Well, let us know when the book comes out. We'll plug it on here.
Thank
I love
you.
it. All right. Well, with that, you can contact us by going to codexpodcast.net. That's our website. It's got everything on there. Our Discord, our Trello boards where we keep our piles of shame of games we haven't played but we purchased. Our Instagram. we have an Instagram now. So codexpodcast.net, or send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. With that, thank you once again, Alyse Knorr, for being here. It's
Thank
always
you.
great having you on. And with
Thank
that,
you.
Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Sure. Goodbye, everybody.